Hi folks, I'm here at the Wells Fargo headquarters in front of the famous Wells Fargo horse-drawn carriage that used to carry gold money throughout the West. In the old days, Wells Fargo was a really honest private institution that pretty much dealt with certificates that were backed by gold and gold itself. But what I want to talk to you about is, now that we have this financial crisis, people might be more willing to listen to the issues about the fundamental characteristic of our financial system, why it's so unstable, and why it keeps causing so much misery. I've been talking about this for both my last two campaigns, but nobody really wanted to listen, because as long as things are going good, people aren't going to question the fundamentals of the financial system very seriously. And so in this particular video, I just want to spend a couple minutes asking you to think about the real fundamental bricks or mud that underlies our financial system. So my qualifications to talk about this are, I've been thinking about it for a long time, ever since I was about 9 years old. I've been trying to figure out why the economy didn't work for so many people. When a very close friend of the family got laid off from Bethlehem Steel, the largest employer at the time in my hometown and my major opponent's hometown. So I've been thinking about unemployment and the misery of unemployment and inflation. And I went to college in the middle of very difficult economic times in the 70s. And I graduated cum laude in economics from a very good institution in St. Louis, Washington University. Had an excellent teacher from the Chicago School of Economics, and learned basic Keynesian and Chicago School economics. But as I went back to my hometown afterwards, mine and my opponent's hometown, I saw increasing unemployment, increasing misery, increasing poverty, and things that happened in the 70s that the Keynesian economics that I learned said were impossible. And that was rising prices and deep unemployment at the same time. So it became obvious to me that Keynesian economics doesn't work. And that's when I discovered another school of economics called the Austrian School. It's only called the Austrian School because in the old days, geographic areas didn't talk that well to each other because there weren't that many translators and there wasn't that many academic papers that translated things into many languages. So as economic conditions deteriorated before World War I and after World War I and World War II, a group of economists in Austria began to develop an alternative theory about economics. And it's called the Austrian theory, not because it was ever really listened to in Austria, but because they were the first people to have insights into how disastrously wrong the economy was in that part of the world in the era just leading up to World War I and between World War I and World War II. So what is the basic problem? According to the Austrian theory, and if I believe that all you folks can get grasp of this, because it's really elementary. And the elementary problem is, if I had an account in this bank, and I went in and deposited $100, they would give me a deposit slip. And I get this little white piece of paper that said, here's your deposit, this represents the fact that you gave us $100. And a whole bunch of other people might come in here and do that too. But the basic problem is that they'll then take that $100 and they'll lend it out for 30 years. And not only will they lend out that $100, but they're permitted by their charter to lend out $1,000 based on the fact that they have that $100 in reserve. So this bank like all banks under the present system, is always bankrupt and always subject to people worrying about the fact that they're not going to get their deposit back. And therefore, there could always be a run on the bank. Now, the way this system began was a long time ago. The system began when people would deposit actual gold in the bank, and they would get a deposit slip for their gold. This is in the Middle Ages, and the deposit slip would be very trustworthy because the bank was very trustworthy. It kept its gold and it didn't lend it out, and the pieces of paper could then be used as the gold itself. But the goldsmiths discovered that they could print extra paper and lend them out and collect interest. And as long as they didn't print too many extra pieces of paper, they could get away with it. Another example of thinking about the deposits is to think of a wheat warehouse. And this is in the book from Murray Rothbard called What the Government Has Done to Our Money. So Murray Rothbard talks about a wheat warehouse. Imagine an honest wheat warehouse that's been honest for 100 years. And farmers come and they put their wheat in the wheat warehouse and they get a certificate for their wheat. This certificate says that you have 5,000 pounds of winter wheat number 2 in this warehouse. And they fill this warehouse and hundreds of warehouses all over the country with winter wheat number 2. And the certificates, and they never print more certificates than they have wheat in their wheat warehouse. And so the certificates for wheat can then be traded among farmers, or the farmer can take it to the bank and get a loan based on the value of that wheat certificate. And the wheat certificate is as good as money. So now suppose that the son of the wheat warehouse owner goes to the Yale Business School, along with President Bush or the Harvard Business School, and meets other politicians there in training and learns business in the East Coast business schools. Well, then he's going to come up with the idea that he can increase the world's wealth by printing more certificates for wheat. At least he can increase his own wealth. So he starts to print more certificates for wheat than he has wheat in the wheat warehouse. And he might get away with this for many years. But one day, if there's for some reason a blight or something, and we run out of wheat, and everybody comes for their wheat, the last people to come are going to find out there's no wheat in the wheat warehouse because they printed more receipts. And that's a clear fraud, no doubt about it. And that wheat warehouse guy is going to go to jail. So this is what a bank is chartered to do. With the wheat warehouse, it's called a fraud. With the bank, it's called business. And people get very upset when you say that the act of giving me a deposit slip for money that they don't have is a fraud, because they say because businessmen do this all the time, this is the status quo. And everybody thinks it's status quo, especially if it's legalized by the bank charters, that the status quo is okay. It can't be a fraud because it's legal. So in that sense, it's not a fraud. But in the larger sense of for the overall public good, it might be considered a fraud.